Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm doing some thrift to treasure home decor makeovers. This video is part of the Thrift Flip Road Trip challenge hosted by Unicorn Dust Designs, DIY Craftaholic and the Crafting Cousins. If you're in the US, you can participate in a giveaway with prizes from the Crafting Cousins, Unicorn Dust Designs and CJ DIY. To enter the giveaway, you need to watch the May Thrift Flip Road Trip playlist. The link is in the description below. You need to comment your favorite project on each creator's video, and you also need to make sure that you do that by May 24th, as the winner is going to be announced on May 25th. For my first project today, I'm going to be working on this lovely clock. Now, it did have quite a few cracks and dings, and I did have to replace the clock mechanism, but it definitely had a lot of potential. My first step was to remove the clock face itself. There's some little screws in the back that I need to take out, and that way I can take the clock out, and it's going to make painting this a lot easier. I'll store the screws in a Ziploc bag. Next, I'm going to use Redesign's Finley mold, and I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Rapid Casting Resin in black. This is a new product. I'm going to be measuring out equal parts step 1 and step 2, and then mixing them together. I really like the bottles that these come in because I often tend to overpour or I get some spillage. You get a lot more control with these. So I'm going to stir it really well for about 30 seconds. And then once I have that thoroughly mixed, I'm going to pour it into the larger frame design. And if I have any left over, I'm just going to add it to the center design. The thing I really like about this black casting resin is if you're going to use a metallic like gold or bronze, it makes getting coverage a lot easier and quicker. After about 10 minutes, my resin is set and I can take them out of the molds. The reason I cast this design is because I want to add some ornate details to the clock. I'm envisioning this top section going up the top of the clock, so I'm going to cut away the section that I want to use. It's very easy to cut this resin. Then I'm going to position the rest of the frame just on top of the clock while I'm visualizing how I want the rest of the design to be. I'm then going to start cutting off the pieces that I'm going to need to create my design. Before I start doing any gluing, I did decide to use my hairdryer to heat up the resin piece. These had been sitting for a little while. This is just going to make it a little bit easier for me to bend and manipulate it to my project shape. I'm going to continue to cut the pieces to the size and shape that I want, and then I'm going to come in with some hot glue and add it to the surface of the clock. I'm also going to be using some Gorilla super glue on the back as well for extra hold. I'm going to position my piece on top of the glue and hold it in place for about 30 seconds. I am going to continue adding the resin pieces around the top section. It doesn't matter if these don't fit perfectly because I'm going to be using some texture a little bit later, so that will hide any really obvious gaps, but overall this is definitely a really good fit for this project. So as you can see, I'm adding them on the left and right hand side, really thinking about the shape of my design. And I've used resin for this because some of the castings are sitting above the clock, so they need that extra support that resin brings. I'm also going to glue another piece down the bottom in the center. As I said at the start, this piece had quite a few cracks and dings in it. I'm going to use some air dry clay. I'm just forcing it into the cracks to fill those in, just to give them a little bit more stability so they don't break off, but also to fill that in. Even though I'm going to use texture, I just want to make sure that that is a nice, neat finish. So I'm just pushing that in. I'm then going to take some sea spray texture additive and add it to a brown chalk paint, and I'm just stirring it really well. I'm then going to start applying it to my clock. Now, I am just brushing it on to start off with, but I do go back and start doing some dabbing and stippling so that I can create texture. I want this to look like a vintage clock, and in order to achieve that look, I need to think about the first layer of paint, and adding this is definitely going to give it more of an aged, weathered feel. So I'm going to continue adding that sea spray mixture over the entire clock, including the back. I did one coat and let my mixture dry completely. I'm then going to use Fusion's Sea Glass Milk Paint. I'm going to measure out a capful of the milk paint powder and then add an equal amount of water to the mixture and then stir it really well. If you want it to be even smoother, I suggest a whisk or an immersion blender. Once I'm finished mixing my milk paint, I'm going to start applying the paint. I'm starting up the top where we have the resin pieces glued down. As you can see, adding that texture has definitely helped blend the resin pieces with the clock quite seamlessly, and adding this paint over the top is definitely going to help as well. So I'm really working it into all of the details that we added and also making sure that I have good coverage. It's only going to take one coat, but I'm not going to be worried if my milk paint or brush skips over the texture. I do definitely want to have some of that paint peeking underneath that brown paint because that's going to make it look chippy and again weathered and worn. In this particular section, I held it like this as I was painting because I didn't want any of that milk paint to go on the inside section of the clock. I want to keep that cream that's going to match the clock face, and I don't want to have to go in there and try and paint the inside because it is a very tight fit. It would be very tricky to get a nice clean finish. So our aim is to not get any of that paint in there. I'm going to continue working my way around the clock painting it, and I also used my hairdryer to speed up the drying process at the end to help create some texture and some crackle. When the milk paint was completely dry, I came in with Paint Couture's Cozy Beige Chalk Paint. I'm just going to begin by adding it to the resin castings that we glued on up the top. I really want to highlight these and just really draw attention to the beautiful shape of these. It's definitely given the clock more of an elegant feel. But as you can see, I'm not going for perfect. I want it to look like that paint has chipped off and faded over the years. I'm also going to add a little bit to some of the details on the front section of the clock and also on the resin piece that we added down the bottom. When that was dry, I came in with a wet wipe and started doing some wet distressing. Milk paint can be reactivated by water, so wet distressing really is a great way to reveal the layers underneath, especially that texture that we created with the sea spray. I'm also pulling back some of the cozy beige paint that we added to the details. Again, I want this to look like quite an aged piece. So I'm just going to go around and do distressing in some of the areas. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It just depends what look you're after. I want this to have a little bit of a French country look, so I'm going to take Paint Couture's Antique Gold Luxe Metallic and I'm just going to add a little bit of that on the resin castings that we added up the top. And as you can see, again, not going for perfect. I want this to look like weathered and worn gilding. I'm also going to add a little bit down the bottom. When that was dry, I came in with some white wax on a chip brush and I'm really working it into all of the carvings, into the texture that we created with the milk paint and the sea spray mixture. This is going to seal my paint, and that's really the best way to seal milk paint is with wax, but it's also going to tone my paint and give it a bit of a faded, worn look. I often reach for the dark wax for this, but I wanted to keep things quite light, and the white wax really is catching that texture beautifully. So I'm definitely liking this look. I'm also using a microfiber cloth now to buff that wax and also pull back some of the excess. I don't want to pull it completely back. We definitely want that white to highlight the curves and the details, but I definitely want to make sure I don't have any big blobs of wax hanging around. We need to get rid of those. If you don't have white wax, you could try a paint wash instead. Just keep in mind if you're using it over milk paint, you may accidentally reactivate it, or a glaze could also work as well, or some white dry brushing. Now we're going to move on to the clock face. I've already replaced the mechanism and I just have some pieces from the traditional Pots transfer. This is one of the blue designs that I've cut apart and I'm just arranging it here how I want it to be on the clock face. I'm going to start with that lovely symbol up the top there, and I'm just going to use the transfer stick that comes in the pack to rub that down. Then I will pick up part of that plastic and start pulling it away as I'm rubbing. Remember to take your time with this, especially with text, as that can be a little bit fiddly and tricky to make sure that you have all of those little pieces down. I definitely wanted to add something to the clock face, not too much because we have a lot going on with the clock frame itself, but I think that the text on this definitely finishes it off nicely, and the traditional pots transfer is always a really safe bet. There are so many elegant designs that you can use and add to your projects. So I'm just adding the last transfer now, the word Paris. I love anything French, so I think that this is just the perfect complement to the rest of the design. Because this is going to be behind glass, I don't need to seal it. I just need to put it all back together again and put it back in the clock. And here's our finished French country clock. I'm really pleased with how this turned out. I think that it definitely had a great base to start off with, but adding the castings and the milk paint and the transfer, of course, has definitely transformed it completely. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next project, I'm going to be working on this pot that I thrifted. It does have some engraved lettering down the bottom there. So my first step is to add some wood glue and then some of my Das air dry clay to really fill in the engraving so that I have a nice flat surface to work on. Once I filled in all of the words, I'm going to add some cornstarch to my rolling pin and the plastic sheet, and then I'm going to use some Das air dry clay, and I'm going to start rolling that out until it's about 1 mil thick. So I'm really working that clay, making it nice and thin. This is a look that I have done on a previous video a few months ago, and I definitely love the look. I'm going to spread some more of my wood glue on my pot there, and then I'm going to lay my rolled out clay on top of that. I'm going to gently press that down. I'm going to use my palette knife to cut off any of the excess clay, and often what I will do then with that excess is I will have a look and see if I can continue that design, continue to add that to the surface to fill in any gaps that are left. I'm also trimming off the excess from down the bottom as well. Here, as you can see, I'm adding some of my offcuts to a section that doesn't have enough clay. I'm pressing it into the other one, and then I'm going to use my mister to wet the clay a little bit. This helps to blend the two pieces together. I'm just rubbing that water in and gently rubbing the clay together. I'm going to repeat this process until I have the entire middle section of my pot covered with my air dry clay. I don't mind if there's some of the cracks showing because I do actually really want that texture. I let the clay and glue dry for a few hours, and now I'm going to use Redesign's Lavender Harvest Mould. I'm going to dust the design that I want with cornstarch, and then I'm going to work my Das air dry clay into one of the lavender pieces. I don't want to have the long stems of the lavender because I have to make sure that they are going to fit on my pot, but basically I am then going to flex the mold, flip it over, and as you can see, gravity is definitely a big help. I'm going to be positioning lavender around the outside of my pot, and I'm going to be alternating sizes so that there is some interest and somewhere for the eye to go. I don't want them to all be one size. I almost want this to look like it's the top of a lavender field wrapped around the pot. So I'm just going to continue making my castings until I have a few ready that I can start to organize my design. Next, before my clay is dry and before I glue the lavender down, I'm going to press the Redesign Vintage Script stamp into my clay to make an impression. This particular stamp has 3 different fonts. I love the curves in this one, and I'm just going to work my way around the pot, pressing that into the clay. Ultimately, I want to think about the layers here. I've already got the cracks and uneven nature of the clay, but I also want the faded script in the background, again, just to add some interest to my project. Next, I'm going to start gluing my lavender pieces down. I'm using my Sealy's Quickset wood glue on the back, making sure I have a generous amount there, and then I'm going to glue it down over the top of the clay. Wherever I have overhang on the bottom from the stems, I'm just going to cut those off. I'm just going to continue arranging the lavender. Some of them I'm going to put closer than others. I'm just going to vary the spacing between each of them. I don't want it to look perfect. Nature's not perfect. And if you're going to do this, obviously you could add even more, or maybe you could do a bouquet of lavender if this was a little bit too crowded. I'm also going to vary the sizes. As you can see, I've just taken a single piece of lavender or a lavender head, and I'm just adding that. And I'm also going to be casting 3 of the sweet little bees that are in the Lavender Harvest mold. I love these, and they have a left and right facing one. I don't mind which way they face. I just want to do 3 because it's an uneven number. I glued the lavender pieces around the entire pot, let it dry overnight, and the next day I'm coming in with Paint Couture's Buttercream chalk paint. I'm going to be painting the entire outside of the pot, and as you can see, the colour that's already on the pot goes a little bit down into the pot, not all the way. I'm going to be following the same design there and just painting up to that point. If somebody wants to use this to actually put a plant in, they can. There's no point in me putting paint all the way down the bottom if they're going to put some soil in there. So I'm going to continue painting the pot. I ended up doing 2 even coats. When the paint was dry, I used Paint Couture's light brown sugar antiquing glaze. I'm using a chip brush and really working that glaze into all of the details of our lavender castings, and also thinking about the texture or the lines in the clay where the different pieces meet, and also of course the impressions from the vintage script stamp. So I'm laying down that product, then I'm also going to take out my mister and add a little bit of water. This is going to help to move that product. It lightens it a little bit, reduces the intensity, and it also helps that product go just a little bit further. So I'm going to continue to do that. I'm going to be adding this to the entire outside of the pot and a little bit down into the pot wherever I've put that buttercream. I'm then going to be using a wet wipe to pull back some of the excess. On the lavender, I'm wiping it back. On the clay sections, I'm doing a bit more of a dabbing motion. Same goes for the base. I'm going to continue this process until I have the entire outside of the pot covered with that glaze. In a lot of projects, glaze is often one of the last things that you use, especially antiquing glaze, but I'm using the glaze to really bring out the details, and then I'm going to be adding coloured paint over the top. I didn't want my coloured paint to be toned by the glaze, that's why I did it in this order. Next, I'm going to be doing a custom mix of 2 parts Purple Haze and 1 part Cozy Beige Paint Couture chalk paint, and I'm going to be adding that onto the lavender flowers there. I'm just dabbing it on. I don't need perfect coverage here. I want this to have a bit more of a vintage look, so again, it doesn't matter if I don't have that perfect coverage. I'm going to be working in sections here, so once I have finished adding the purple to the lavender, I'm going to take a wet wipe and start dabbing back some of that paint so that it looks like it's worn away and we can see some of that buttercream peeking through underneath. I don't want to go around the whole pot and then come back and try and do this. It might be a little bit tricky to get that chalk paint off. I'm then going to use Autumn Sage chalk paint by Paint Couture, and I'm going to be adding that to the stems. Just like I did with the lavender, I'm also going to use a wet wipe to pull back some of that autumn sage from the stems. And I'm going to continue to work my way around the pot, repeating those steps until I have all of the lavender painted. I honestly think that the pot looked quite nice with just the glaze on there, but I definitely wanted to add some color to my project. But just remember that at any point, if the project looks better suited to your decor as it is, you can always leave the steps that come after out. This is definitely something that you can customize to your style. When my paint was dry, I took out some of my buttercream chalk paint and I'm just offloading some of that on a paper towel, and now I'm doing some dry brushing over the top of the entire pot, really focusing on the lavender, also on the impressions that we made with the stamps, because that's really going to bring out the details in those. And I am changing directions. Sometimes I'm going up and down, sometimes I'm going from side to side, and I'm really loving the look that this is creating. Once I finished dry brushing, I decided I wanted to add some details to the bees after all. So I'm using some of Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint on a small artist brush. And I'm just going to go in and add some black on certain parts of the bee, like the legs and the face, and obviously the little stripes. I don't need it to be perfect. I am going to be going back in and doing some dry brushing over the top of this so it blends a bit better with the rest of the design. But I just didn't want the little bees getting too lost in amongst the rest of this project. I'll be repeating the same process for each of the 3 bees. If you're going to do this, you could come in with some yellow or gold if you wanted. I just wanted to keep it pretty neutral. Once my paint was dry, I went over the top of the bees with a little bit of dry brushing. And here's our finished lavender pot. I love how this turned out. The lavender molds have completely transformed a plain pot into something quite lovely. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project, I'm going to be working on this canister. Now, I really love the color, I really love the shape, and when I find projects like this, I always reach for IOD's Traditional Pots Transfer. I'm working my way through it, and anytime I come across a lovely pastel color like this pink, I often reach for the white designs in this pack. I think this project has a little bit of a farmhouse French country feel to it, so I've selected the rooster design. I'm going to put some items either side of the pot so that it's stabilized, and I am then going to just double check that the surface is clear from any debris and it's not wet. I'm then going to take the backing off the transfer and position that over the top, and I'm already loving how the white is on top of that pink. I'm then going to start rubbing over the top of the transfer with the transfer tool. I like to go over the top of the entire design to start off with, just to make sure that everything is stuck down and it's not going to start sliding everywhere. So just going over the top of the whole thing first, and then once I think that that's stuck down pretty well, I will then pick a corner and I will start lifting that as I'm rubbing and making sure that that's releasing. This had a few different little levels, and obviously it was a curved piece, so I did take my time in certain areas just to really make sure that that transfer was stuck to the canister. And then I used my fingers to make sure everything was pressed down, and then I'll use the carrier sheet to further burnish it. I'll then seal my project with Rust-Oleum's Clear Satin Spray Sealer. And here's a look at the finished project. This was a quick and easy flip, but I am loving how that white transfer looks on the pastel pink canister. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video. Let me know in the comments if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. Remember to check out the Thrift Flip Road Trip playlist in the description below. And if you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.